What's up guys, my name is Sarthe and today we're going to do the ultimate guide for how to basically do as much damage as possible in Serpent Shrine Cavern. Now this is focused primarily on boss damage, which can translate kind of to parses, although parsing in TBC is kind of meme-esque, and we'll go into that in a second. If you do want to focus all the way through on overall damage, which I personally think is more important overall, right? It helps your raid better. Then Enthozz actually has done some really incredible videos diving through entire raids and basically breaking down everything he's doing, everything that's going through his head, and everything that he did that was messing up. It was pretty much what I was gonna do, but it's like the exact video that is perfect for that situation. So I'll have those linked in the description. Those are amazing. But today I'm going to break down everything that should be going through your head when you are fighting each of the bosses, where you should position, where you should use cooldowns, what consumables you should be using on each fight, and basically how you can manage your pet, or how you can manage pretty much everything in the fight to make sure you do as much damage as possible. Now, I used to do pretty much these exact videos as a rogue in Classic from all of the phases from Molten Core on, so we're gonna do that in TBC as a hunter. And there's a lot of little things for every boss that you can focus on that will easily increase your DPS. Now, one last thing, of course, if you like this video or any sort of content, make sure to like and subscribe. Hit me up in the comments if you want me to cover anything. If you want any of my UI or some other videos and guides, make sure to check out the Discord. And with that being said, let's dive right in. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about, and before we get into any of the actual boss guides, because this is the first one of its kind, is that there's a lot of things that go into doing DPS and TBC, a lot of things that are either in your control or a lot of things that are out of your control. So we're going to kind of dive into all of those. The first thing, and this is like the most kind of frustrating part about TBC, is your raid composition and your group composition means a ton towards how much damage you're going to do overall throughout the raid, as well as on particular boss encounters. So the best two group compositions for you, and these are going to greatly increase your DPS, are the ones I have here on the screen. Now, the best one you could have as a Beastmaster Hunter for your personal DPS on a boss is going to be 2 BM Hunters, a Warrior for Battle Shout, especially if he has the Trinket and Tier 2 bonus. This is huge for your pet's damage. Enhanced Shaman, and then a Feral Druid. Feral Druids, even with the Jewel Crafting Neck, now give you 7% crit basically. Having this group composition will, no matter what, greatly increase your DPS. The second best and probably the most common situation for most of you out there is having multiple BM Hunters where you're all buffing each other, as well as one other Shaman, either a Enhance if you could get it, or a Resto, whatever it is, and then the Feral Druid again. And one thing here, the big thing to focus on is, again, the Feral Druid itself is such a massive bonus. Now, I myself am usually in a group composition a little bit more like this: 1 Survival Hunter, 2 Beast Mastery Hunters, and we have a Holy Paladin in my group, as well as a Resto Shaman. So this is, no matter what, innately going to make you do less DPS than if you're in either of these two groups. So the first thing to know is, if you're in a terrible group, quote unquote, that's technically out of your control if you're automatically losing some DPS. But there's a lot of things we're going to go over today to make sure that you're min-maxing as much as possible on every boss encounter, so you can make up the difference and so that you can do everything you can. Now, the next thing I want to talk about really briefly is that RNG is a huge part of these tier 5 raids, and it can be really annoying. You can kind of just get griefed for no reason. The boss, like Morogrim, can decide to Watery Grave you 3 times in a row, and you're losing out on uptime. You can also get stunned or banished on Leotheras, and that's not really going to be the focus on today's video. I just needed to mention that right at the beginning. If this does happen to you, GG, just go again next week. And also, you can still put out insane numbers even if that does happen to you. The #1 hunter in the world is in my guild, and that's Nars, and he is consistently getting rank 1 parses, even if he's getting like Watery Graved or RNG things are happening to him. So it's not fully holding you back. Now, the last things to mention right before we get into any of the bosses is basically going to be your consumables. Hunter is the most expensive class to play in raids right now, and that's because of how much consumables you're using for yourself and your pet, as well as there are some cheeky items you can use to increase your DPS. So consumables really fast. The first thing is always going to be your food buff if you're using agility buff, or if you're using potentially a hit food buff if you need to with your gear set. That is just a simple thing. It's very cheap. Then you're going to use your elixirs. I would suggest using elixirs because fights are pretty long right now. So that's going to be major mage blood for mana, as well as major agility. Flask is a tiny difference, but I would focus on these, as well as having demon slaying for SSC in particular for Leotheras. This is amazing. Then you're going to want to make sure you have your potions. That ranges from haste pots for DPS, mana pots, which you can get individual mana pots for both of these tier 5 raids that are going to be cheaper than having actual super mana pots. You're also going to be using fel mana pots, which are crazy expensive. Find a potion master to get those. These are huge on longer fights, especially Lady Vashj. Of course, you've got your scrolls. That is strength and agility. You're using agility on yourself and then agility and strength on your pet. You've also got Kibler's Bits, or an alternative that is just basically a food buff for your pet. Below that, we've got weight stones and sharpening stones. Weight stones are huge, and you should know this by now because weight stones actually increase the damage of your ranged weapon. So you're getting the 12 damage here and the crit rating, while sharpening stones do not do that. So weight stones or fist weapons are generally seen as better, as we can see that fist weapons are the best almost always, unless you are melee weaving. That's something we won't necessarily get too far into today, but it is something that is a little bit harder to pull off in tier 5, but you totally can. We've got things like drums. I would always suggest having your own drums because there's a lot of times where you're positioned kind of off on your own a little bit, and so you want a drums whenever there's downtime or whenever you have to move. If I were you, I would suggest having a stamina food on you. This is just for Lady Vashj itself. And then of course you want to have things like dark runes for mana. These are massive for longer fights, and they do share cooldown with healthstones, but they can be absolutely essential to fights like Vashj again. And then from there, it's basically having your consumables like sapper charges, super sapper charges, and goblin sapper charges, as well as of course the most crucial consumable for all hunters, the steam tonk. Now there is a bit of debate between steam tonk and endless dreams, the potion, where the potion actually doesn't make you lose out on a GCD, while steam tonking your pet does. It does take 2 full GCDs basically to tonk your pet and get him back, resummoning your pet, but your pet does come back at 100% HP, and usually when you're having to steam tonk or just instantly despawn your pet, it is because your pet is about to die. So situationally, this is more often than not significantly more useful than using a potion alternative. And lastly, 2 little cheeky things you can also have that can easily increase your DPS a little bit are 2 trinkets. Having a Devil Sword Tooth trinket, which is from the level 50, maybe 52 quest for hunters. You can pick this up in Orgrimmar or Storm, let's say Ironforge. I don't play Alliance. All it does is it makes sure your pet's next attack is a crit. You can basically equip this before any boss fight, use it, and then your pet's first attack will crit. Making sure you get the first attack as a crit will give your pet increased attack speed with a little flurry. So this is huge. Initially will set you up for a really strong opener, and then you can also use Gnomish Battle Chicken, which if you use this and the buff goes out from it, you get a 5% increase in haste. This is melee haste, so this is again just for your pet. So if your pet attacks faster, you do more damage because your pet is a ton of your damage. So these are 2 cheeky items you can use specifically on bosses if you want to increase your parsing or just do more damage on a boss individually, but you can only use them if you have time in between basically the last pull and the boss, or if you equip it before a trash pack right before the boss. Okay, so finally diving right in, the first boss is Hydross the Unstable. I'm using a VOD from the only raid I've ever had where I actually had a Feral Druid in my guild or in my group, so just you'll know that. The first thing to know about this fight is it is a super easy fight for you to get your Battle Chicken buff up if you just go up and melee attack these adds on the side. So it's a really easy fight for you to get Battle Chicken buff. Those can stack. Hopefully you can get that. And then another thing to note is that this fight is a little bit RNG dependent, but this is another one of the fights where you're using all of your cooldowns right at the beginning of the fight, and you are using a haste pot. This is one of the fights where you are absolutely using a haste pot. There's only maybe one fight really that you're not using a haste pot here. So pretty much on standard or for standard of any fight in TBC is you're going to want to make sure that you're using your CDs right at the beginning of the fight, and you're going to want to make sure that you are MDing on cooldown. This is huge all the way throughout TBC, is MD on cooldown. Hydross, as we know, is the fight where you don't really want to pull aggro if you are on the other side of the boss. You can see here I actually am griefed by being the one that has to use nature protection. We don't have our shaman doing it, so this actually does lose me a lot of DPS. I'm here at 2.3k DPS right now, but I'm having to use nature protection, which is a huge DPS loss, of course. Hopefully you don't have to do that. And then if you are assigned to an MD, this is like one of the biggest things about this fight, is if you are assigned to an MD, especially on one of the transitions, then you don't have to stop DPSing. And uptime is king in this raid, in any raid, in basically any situation. Uptime is always king. So if you don't ever have to stop DPSing, you can absolutely do more damage, right? One more thing to note, there's the RNG at the beginning of the fight where you can get stunned, but also if you aren't assigned to an MD, just make sure you MD during your CDs, because you absolutely don't want to pull aggro on this boss. And then positioning is huge here. I would always suggest positioning on either the left side or the right side, so that when the boss is being kited through the middle, you do not have to move and you don't lose uptime on actually, one, having to reposition, and two, having to pretty much not be able to be in range of shooting, like if you get too close to the boss. Now, kill times are massive on fights that have any sort of phases. That's a huge one, like Lurker. If you can kill it before the second time it goes down, that's gonna just, no matter what, increase your DPS. You lose like 100 to 200 DPS while he goes down each time. So kill times are huge here, but even if you have to drag the boss multiple times, which in all honesty, I have kind of messing up here by just even moving, as you can see in the background. Moving here is just losing out on uptime, especially when I have MD. So this is actually a terrible kind of fight here for me. I'm losing out on a lot of uptime. Also, you do, when the ads are up, want to make sure you're getting multi-shot out very often. And you can see I actually changed my keybind on this pull for my haste pots, so make sure your haste pots are either bound or within your actual CD macro. Again, that's just 2k DPS. Nars and Captain at 2.3k. I was just 100 DPS below them when I had to change my aspect, so that hurts quite a bit having to do that. But this is a fight that is a lot about positioning so that you never have to move. You can absolutely play this fight without ever moving and without ever losing downtime. But if your guild does require you to stop DPSing when the boss actually transitions, one thing that we do, and I think is really useful, is actually we change and target one specific of the ads first. So we all start DPSing the front right ad right as the transition happens. It just allows your tank a little bit of time to get aggro, but some guilds don't even do that. They just keep pumping and believe in their tanks. It depends on what your guild is doing there, but you never really need to lose that much downtime or that much uptime on the boss if you are in the right position. And again, use your CDs early because they're going to come up again right at the end of the fight, or if you have a longer fight, they'll come up again later. And one last note, if you are actually close enough to the boss as he's transitioning, you can use a sapper. A sapper will give you some cheeky damage here, and it'll actually do quite a bit of damage because sappers are kind of amazing. So if you are close enough to be able to get that off while not being too close to kind of grief yourself for any real uptime, then that is some extra damage for you right there. The Lurker Below. This is a fight that I have an entire video out about how to manage your pet. If you guys don't boil the water, you never really have to worry about your pet management. But if you do boil the water, basically by killing all of the ads up top, pet management is huge here. And I'm going to give a brief breakdown of that. So pet management on this fight. If you do boil the water, if the water is basically like lava, then make sure you set your pet on stay on the platform, especially if you can be on the platform yourself. Set your pet on a stay position here, because every time you go into the water, he's going to be underneath the water attacking the boss. And then you'll have to use your /pet passive macro, which whatever you have that on, mine's just a scroll wheel /pet passive. Your pet will come back to the position it was for stay, so it'll come all the way back up, and then you can have it attack the boss again. Losing your pet on this fight is the biggest DPS loss, other than, of course, if the boss actually gets a second transition or goes down again. Try to beat it before it can do that, but that's just all up on your raid DPS. That's not on you. And then also, if you do boil the water and your pet is stuck in the water, make sure you just tonk it and send it back in. Always tonk your pet. Always be watching your pet on this fight. It's really, really important, and it is a massive DPS loss or gain to manage your pet well, and make sure that your pet's not fighting just in the water, which it will do if you don't set a stay position and the water is lava. Now, here on this fight, we actually did use the strategy where you get the fish in the water, so we don't actually kill all trash packs. Then there's two things that can happen. If you do set your pet stay right here, it could get meleeed first if your tank isn't in position, and we're using a tank that we just recruited, so a trial tank. So Tweety actually is standing pretty far back, and she gets meleeed before the boss comes up. You obviously want your tank to be in position to take the first melee and grab the boss initially, so it doesn't just kill someone as it comes up. And also here, you also do want to drums right away, and then you're actually gonna use your CDs pretty early. If Bloodlust comes out, then you're just going to use your CDs early. We're kind of getting a little bit griefed here. As you can see, Bloodlust hasn't happened yet. I popped CDs early, and you actually can hope that you don't get knocked back. Someone told me that you can jump up on top of these like torches and actually never have to dodge any mechanics. Don't know if that's absolutely true, but it's something I actually want to try. I just don't know if there's a raid where I can try it. See here, I get knocked back, and I'm pretty much saving my arcane shot for if this happens. Every time you have to move, arcane shot. Every time you have to move, arcane shot. And you'll see that I move over to the right here because there were still ads in the water, fish in the water. So I didn't want to jump directly back as they were still there and hadn't despawned yet. So I moved over, I said right, but to the left to make sure that that doesn't happen too much. And I'm actually gonna get knocked back again. This is just another thing in these raids. It's just RNG. And I'm just gonna position myself on this back platform here. You can see here I'm at 2.1k DPS. I've had a little bit of bad RNG. Nars is just a god gamer, and he's at 2.6k DPS. So ignore that. I'm just not as insane as him, and that's just pretty much a fact. And then I'm going to tonk my pet and jump back over to the initial platform and bring my pet back out. The reason why I tonked my pet is because it can kind of glitch out a little bit when you're moving between the platforms, especially when you were knocked in the water there. So I wanted to make sure that it was back on the main platform for when the boss comes back alive. So I tonked him, brought him back up on the main platform, and here you're going to focus on doing as much damage as you can, because this phase is the biggest downtime that possibly happens on this boss encounter. This phase is pretty much where you lose most of your DPS, because every one of these ads, as you can see, doesn't have every debuff that you have, and you want, of course, to be doing as much damage to one target that has as much of the debuffs as possible. You can see now Sunders are going up. Judgment of Wisdom is extremely important. Hunter's Mark, of course, up. Curse of Recklessness, everything is up here on the boss again. And then as I jump in, I actually get dazed, so I have to take another step forward just to be safe that the fish can't hit me. So I took another step forward there just to be safe, and then I use my cooldowns again. As the boss is coming back up the second time, that's the perfect time to really use drums, because if there's any downtime, that's the best time. So whenever the boss comes back up, always pops drums there, and then rapid fire comes back. So now I'm in here just trying to catch up to the boys, Nars and Captain, and we actually did get a second lust here, so it's kind of cheesy. So this is probably not the situation you're gonna have for every fight. I wouldn't really, like, someone just got yeeted. look into that too much, guys. That's just the one time this has really happened for me, where I did get a second lust, and I think Nars and Lottie actually get rank 1 Parses here. You can see I actually go here, and I have to use a demonic rune. That was basically because I was using so much of my mana while Judgment was down. But still here, that's 1.8k DPS on Lurker, and the reason you can do the most damage here, again, is if you don't wait for it to phase again. But I did have some pretty bad RNG getting knocked back, but this was a fight where I did get a double lust, so that's going to automatically increase your DPS quite a bit. Okay, on to Leotheras. This fight, you need to make sure you're misdirecting whenever the boss stops doing any of his basically any mechanic, right? Because there is the threat drop. So whenever you're assigned to misdirect, make sure you're doing that. One thing I'm missing out on here is I didn't drums the opening of the fight, but you really want to use your cooldowns early on this fight. Use your cooldowns on these ads at the very beginning of the fight, because you will have them back up during lust on the actual demon phase. And you do absolutely want to lust the demon phase because there's no downtime. You don't have to tonk your pet, nothing happens here. I do get banished, 10 seconds, massively griefed here. You can just see me type out, I was so tilted. And then the big thing for this fight is two things in particular. One, uptime. Always make sure that you're trying to be in a position where you don't have to stop DPSing. And two, managing your pet. Another fight where you don't want your pet to die. Now, I instantly call my pet back as he's starting to do this phase, and you'll actually notice right there, I actually use kill command to keep up my Beast Lord buff. So you'll see as I bring my pet back here, he's gonna run forward for a second. Right as I get kill command, you just make sure you have kill command outside of your steady shot macro. Every good hunter does that. And then you just recall your pet again. So just grab my buff up and then get my pet back here. If your pet's not getting healed, as he gets low, that's when you're going to want to tonk him, because he does have the debuff on him. Make sure you tonk your pet before he dies every time, and then you can bring him back out and he'll get healed. Please don't let your pet die. That is just one of the most important things. You can also notice here that I actually didn't use a haste pot at the very beginning of the fight. That is a mistake from me. Again, in this raid, I actually just changed my keybinds for a couple things, so my haste pots are unbound. And right as he changes to demon form, this is when you need to be ready to pump, and you're going to want to go and swap on to a demon elixir. So I use a haste pot here. Technically, this is a mediocre time for me to be using haste pot, but it's fine. I haven't swapped to demon elixir yet, so that's just a pure mistake, right, guys? That's just straight up a mistake. Always swap to demon elixir here, and then you can switch back to agility elixir when you get back onto the boss. But you'll notice that during this phase, I'm actually gonna get my 2-minute buffs back again. So now I've used everything. I've used all of my 2 minutes are back, and now he is basically just sitting here taking as much damage as we can. So I did miss out on the attack power from my demon elixir, or elixir of demon slaying. If you do get an ad on you, you have to deal with that. I would suggest stunning it with your pet and then blowing it up. They die actually pretty quickly. And then you can see I misdirect there. It's not a great time to misdirect right after he changes phases, because he's gonna whirlwind super early, but I noticed that he hadn't yet. And so I chose to basically do it. And then tonk your pet again, tonk to the pet, and try to get in on the boss. Sometimes this boss, when he does his phase changing, he does some RP. Oh, and I think I might actually die on this boss. I forgot. Sometimes he does actually some RP, and other times you can actually just attack him. I'm not sure why this happens. This is pretty consistent. I can't tonk my pet yet, so my pet might die here. So my pet does die here. You can see my pet goes down, and that's the biggest DPS loss, but I have to summon him back, and we're in demon phase. We actually get the bug where you can DPS him. This is amazing since, oh my God, am I gonna die? Either way, once the boss is pretty low, I actually choose sometimes to just leave my pet in on him and keep DPSing. I did tonk, but I think my pet still died. I think I tonked a split second late, and I end up at 1.8k DPS here. One thing that was a mistake, my pet died. Another one, I didn't switch my elixirs. And a third one, I didn't use my haste pots. Haste potions are massive here, and the only fight that you're very specifically not using haste potions, well, not every time, is going to be Lady Vashj. So My pet dies twice. My positioning was good though. If you are in a position like spread around the room, as well as still getting your buffs from your shaman, then ideally you have as little downtime as possible when you are basically running in the whirlwind phase. So one thing you want to focus on is not running away during the whirlwind phase unless it's directly coming towards you. Make sure you have kind of your own little spot in the room for that. Taunt your pets very early here. Never let them die. I actually still had my pet die because Tonk was on CD. Big Sag. It can happen. If you could actually like pay a healer to just solo heal your pet, it would be the ultimate cheese. Most likely you're not going to have that sort of a situation. Just try to live, try to keep your pet alive, and try to have as much uptime on the boss as possible. Use your CDs right away because they will be back up when you have lust later. And again, you're going to lust and pop everything you can during the demon phase because that's when you have pure uptime. Your pet never needs to run away from the boss. You're just sitting there DPSing him, and you have more damage because you have your elixir of demon slaying. Okay, Fathom Lord Leotheras. If you want to do a lot of damage on this fight, there's a few things to focus on. One, multi-shot is your absolute friend. You're already multi-shotting on CD, but whenever there's multiple targets, multi-shot can be massive. You can get some cheeky damage out with sabotage and some explosive traps, but that's not necessarily your primary focus. To do more damage, technically, you wouldn't be killing the Spitfire Totem because the boss has the debuffs. You want the armor debuffs to basically make it take more damage. You're going to want to use cooldowns early, right? So Bloodlust and cooldowns early. Oh, no, it looks like we do. We do have Bloodlust, and you can see how fast this skull target is actually going down. One thing ideally you don't want to have to do ever is actually feign during your cooldowns and Bloodlust, which I have to do here. And I do it actually a split second late. Always feign a second early, but feigning is 2 GCDs or a full GCD and getting back up. So that does make sure you lose uptime. Hopefully your guild doesn't make you kill the last ad. The third one, the girl, I think her name is Charybdis. Hopefully your guild allows you guys just to sit here and pump the boss. This will greatly increase your DPS because increasing fight length or shortening fight length always increases DPS, as well as you don't have any downtime where you're moving the whole time where you would run to that boss. There is a little bit of RNG on this fight. If the whirlwind or the whirlpool comes towards you, you have to move, as well as if he hits you with that shadow bolt, it does knock you down, and that's just kind of unfortunate. The simple fact of it is you pretty much want to move as little as possible, like every other fight, multi-shot as much as possible, and then you're pretty much, after the ads die, just focusing on your normal rotation, which I actually kind of screw up in this actual fight here, so don't worry about that. 2.1k DPS, not great, but the other boys at 2.7 did a great job. Morogrim Tidewalker. Big things here to watch out for. Threat. At the beginning, this boss is something that you definitely have to watch your threat on. Your tanks do have a haste debuff on them. You can see my Feign Death just resisted right there. I wanted to Feign Death early before I started DPSing. Also, you can see I do get some internal like server lag, quite a bit actually, but that's because I'm playing on EU as a NA player. But this opener here, I'm currently at 3k DPS. I shouldn't have been moving there at all. Never move if there's no reason to, but I actually stopped DPSing. Like I fully stopped DPSing because I'm worried on threat and I don't have Feign back yet. So I wasn't actually pushing as high as I thought. Didn't have to stop DPSing there. You guys shouldn't stop DPSing there, and of course multi-shot on CD here. I'm going to also be on an MD target. Misdirect is huge here. Oh my gosh, look at that. What an RNG fight. At least I got a trap out. Explosive trap on the ads if you can, if you're not assigned to actually using frost trap, and then of course multi-shot every chance you can on these ads. Another thing here, one thing that is huge for your guild or anything that's struggling, and it's just useful in general, Sapper Charge and Explosive Trap both fully work with Misdirect. So you can use both Sappers if you get to be able to use the first Sapper on the first pack, Super Sapper, and then it'll put your other Sapper on a 1 minute CD. So you can use a super sapper into another sapper. You can see my sappers are on CD because I actually drumsed here on the onset, and because I am not assigned to sapper till a minute later, so I wanted to basically hold off on my sappers until basically this second set of murlocs come out. Make sure you're always explosive trapping the murlocs if you can. It's quite a bit of DPS, but it's not the biggest thing. And then again, MDs and sappers. I didn't actually hit all of the targets, and I got unlucky with no crits on my sappers. That's just something that's, again, RNG. This is a fight that you absolutely can be pretty much owned on in RNG, and that's just not something in your control. CDs should come back up in the middle of the fight, which you might get a bloodlust if your guild is doing the bloodlust later strategy. So a big thing here, kill time can help a lot, but getting this bloodlust at the end when you have your second CDs can be really nice because the initial onset of the fight means you might be threat capped. Then every time you're moving, every time you have to move, make sure you're always arcane shotting. Like every time you have to move, make sure you're not in an auto shot window and make sure you're arcane shotting. That's just Hunter 101, but it's something that a lot of hunters don't do as much. I actually mess up here and let the boss outrange me. Huge mistake from your boy Sarthe, and I get another bloodlust. This is like ultra cheese. It would be really nice if I didn't play this a little bit poorly, and I actually probably don't even have to move from those ads. Actually, here, yeah, it's smart too. Every time you're moving, again, just make sure you are arcane shotting and then multi-shot on CD. Lady Vashj, the big fight here and probably the hardest one to parse. There's actually a lot to think about here on this fight. Positioning is important, and the second thing, or the thing that's even bigger, assignments are huge. If you have an assignment, if you're assigned to a side to kill elementals, you are absolutely going to do less damage than anyone that can just free roam. That's just a fact. So get that in your head if you can, if you have sway with your guild master, whatever it is, and be like, oh, can I just stay up top and just DPS the elites and striders? Do that. That's awesome because you will do more damage. First things first. Make sure you set your pet stay as you're running in if you're running in early to LOS on these pillars, because your pet will be on the left of you a little bit and he will aggro the boss and initially start the fight early, as well as take like one shot and just get killed instantly. So the first thing you're going to do, of course, set your pet stay if you're running in on time or getting into position early. The pull is a little bit early for me, so I lose a couple shots up time by being out of position myself. Another thing that is really useful in this fight is not to have your pet dash on auto and to be manually doing it. I have it on auto, and that's just because I don't have another keybind yet, but I should, so I will be changing that myself. That's just a mistake. You can see actually Judgment of Wisdom actually fell off, so that's losing us a lot of mana. This is a massive mana fight, guys. Lady Vashj is hugely mana dependent, and mana and positioning mean a lot for this fight. They mean, one, you have more uptime DPS in the boss, because if the boss is coming or being kited directly towards you in the later phases, you're going to lose uptime, you're going to have to move. And then two, if you run out of mana, you're screwed. So the big things on this fight are start the fight off with all of your cooldowns, and that's with a haste potion. Start the fight off big. You can see I'm at 2.5k or 2.4k DPS here. Start the fight off with all of your cooldowns, and then Dark Rune and Fell Mana Pot early. Dark Rune, Fell Mana Pot early. Hopefully you have a shaman or your shaman near you wherever you're assigned, and no matter what your assignment is, during the beginning of phase 2, just go down and fight elementals. There's nothing else to do here except for just do DPS. So the biggest thing you can do on this entire fight is always be DPSing. Now, being in a good position, like being up top, is huge because you're also DPSing ads that have armor debuffs. And of course, as we know, armor debuffs greatly increase your DPS. And if you can just sit there and focus on one ad at a time or one mob at a time, no matter what, you're doing more damage. Another thing that you can do here to min-max your DPS, and I'm actually going to increase the time here because there's no point watching this whole phase, is to actually be up top and DPS or send your pet in to the elites every time they spawn. Now, you could probably set up a macro to target the elites and then send your pet on them. I would always send my pet on them. Your pet's going to do more damage fighting the elite than it is on these elementals, and if you're hanging out kind of up top, like this is something I would do more than what I'm doing right now, is kind of always be a little bit up top near the elementals or near the elites so that you can DPS them whenever you have the chance to, and always just be waiting or watching for tainted elementals. So always be ready to get back into position before a tainted is gonna spawn. That is huge, because if you let one go, that's on you. You can see that I get a tainted here, and I'm just moving into position. Whenever I move, ideally I'm using arcane shot. I didn't right there. And then you throw your core, and you see now I'm arcane shotting. Now I'm moving. I'm getting back up on elementals. You kind of can let some almost go by during that phase when you're getting your tainted, but I wouldn't really. And then MD if you can. Make sure you're MDing the elites whenever you can to anyone near you. But my pet again is always going to be sent onto the elites. Now, moving on to the next phase, or actually one last thing I should mention really fast, is that whenever you have Bestial Wrath, you can be hard pumping the Striders if you're in position, because your pet won't get feared. If not, have your pet ideally on the elites first. You can see I'm checking behind myself to make sure a tainted doesn't spawn there. So if not, you can send your pet onto the elite and you can DPS the Striders, and just make sure that you're getting your kill commands out and getting the buff from kill command itself. Right as Vashj comes out, you want to be pumping the boss. So you actually ideally are going to instantly actually change your DPS or change your target to Lady Vashj, and other people are going to finish off the elementals. There's other people like enhanced shamans or LE shamans that can kill the elementals, but you just make sure none of them get close. You can see I switch to them whenever I can. And now this is going to be the biggest phase where positioning means a lot. You obviously don't want to be stacked in the middle, but you want to be near the boss. You can see as Nars is hard DPSing the boss, you're doing more damage than doing damage to the elementals, because we have Expose, we have Recklessness, we have, of course, like Fairy Fire. You have the debuffs on the boss, so you want to be DPSing the boss, and you want to be in positions where you can be in front of the boss as it's being kited. So ideally, this would be one of the best positions possible right there. Positioning is huge here, but if you do have something like Bloodlust up, you want to be moving as little as possible. So right now you can see I'm not really repositioning. I've got 31 seconds on my Dark Rune, so my mana is a little bit low. I'm at 1.1 or 1.41 attack speed anyways, so I'm just doing a 1-to-1 rotation right now. There's no point in me taking a step there. You can use things like Slowing Trap, or even better, using things like Snake Trap on the MC targets, because they actually will target those little snakes. Very cheeky, and it's useful for your raid. I don't have a crazy amount of mana, so I opted not to, but that's something that you probably should be doing even so. You can also see that I had Steam Tonked my pet, because my pet was actually rooted in the damage. Just make sure your pet doesn't die here, and always try to position yourself in front of the boss. So again, someone to look at, Nars, who is pretty much has the rank 1 on this fight like 6 times in a row. He also doesn't have an assignment. I'm peanut butter and jealous, but he will always be positioned in front, and he's always just pumping this boss. So you'll see if the boss actually moves over here, I'm probably going to lose out on some uptime by losing the LOS here and having to move. Nars actually even gets MC'd there, so he loses out on some uptime. That's just RNG. There's nothing you can do. And another thing here is you're going to want to fell mana this boss as much as you can later phases, especially this last phase, because you do want to have health stone ready, because you can die really fast to a multi-shot and then a poison drop on yourself. So fell mana pot is your friend over having a Dark Rune during this phase. That is actually kind of crucial, because if you die, you absolutely lose more damage than you have. Positioning is key in almost all fights, especially if there's any sort of movement of the boss, or you need to do any movement, because as little movement as possible, and you can just stay DPSing, stay doing your rotation, your steady shots, your 5-5-1-1, or your 1-1, whatever you're at the moment. stay in those positions and focus on damaging the boss instead of having to move is always going to increase your DPS. And that, again, if you want to increase your overall damage with trash and stuff, it's things like using MDs, using explosive traps on CD. But again, Enthozz has a great video breaking down his raid where he got a rank world 3rd for overall damage here. I think it's below Nars and Captain, who are obviously in this raid, but that's a good one to check out. Again, that'll be in the description. That is amazing. But this is how to min-max your DPS on every one of the bosses here in SSC. Everything you want to be thinking about when you want to use which cooldowns and what you want to be watching out for, how you can position and how you can play to increase your damage. All right, and that's basically it, guys. That's everything I have for you, other than things out of your control, of course, like group composition, raid debuffs, which you actually do want to track. You could see that I was always tracking those above my target. In case someone like drops Judgment of Wisdom, you can call out for that in Discord. Some RNG with you getting like Watery Graved, like you saw that happen to me. And if you get like double Lust, which is super cheeky and has only happened to me in that one raid right there. Everything I talked about today is everything you can actually control and do to min-max your DPS and make sure you're getting these 99s. My ult actually has almost all 99s. Its average is 98.7 right now because it has Steelhawk crossbow, which is like really nice, you know. From Karazhan, I haven't actually seen the Sun Fury bow. And so you can have a non-optimal group without a feral druid. You should have a shaman at least, and you can have non-optimal gear with some green gear and blue gear like I have on my ult, and still be pulling all 99s on fights if you are doing as much as possible to increase your uptime and to utilize your cooldowns to the most of their ability. Thank you guys all for watching. I really appreciate it. I will be doing the same thing for TK, but it's gonna be a lot shorter because I don't have to talk about everything else. Now that I've done that, it's just gonna be straight up the bosses. If you like this sort of content, of course, make sure to like and subscribe. If you want to see me cover anything else, make sure to let me know in the comments. And if you want anything from my UI or to come hang out with me, either check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/Sarthe or actually in the Discord channel where all of my UI is. Last thing I gotta say, guys, is good luck out there. I'll see you all on the meters and on Warcraft vlogs. And hopefully this week I'll be back up in the top 10 because my last raid was pretty unfortunate. And if you have any questions, just swing by the Twitch and let me know. Peace.